Prof-It is brought to you by StopToShop.com, and they've got some of the best prices on the internet for the new Emerging Power set. Now's the perfect time to stock up on playable cards like Gothitelle, Pokemon Catcher, Tornadus, or even the new Pokemon Trading Card Game Online code cards. Click on the link in the description to check out the set. When you do, you'll get a 10% discount on your full order at checkout. When you're looking for cards, make the stop. It's Stop to Shop.
Hey Pokemon fans, it's JWittz here from the Pokemon Trading Card Game show Prof-It, and all I really want to say today is thank you. I'm rounding out to 1 million views, just a couple thousand to go, and after this video is up, I should be pretty close to finally reaching that big milestone. I know in the grand scheme of things, 1 million views isn't really that much. A viral video can get a couple million in just a day, but to me, it's a pretty special mark, and it shows that the Pokemon community cared this much about just having a new form of media for the Pokemon trading card game to share with everybody around the world. Thanks a ton for all your support. We're rounding almost 2 years now at November, and I couldn't have done any of this without you. Each one of those views is yours, and I hope that you guys all applaud yourself for all the help. Here's to a great Pokemon trading card game community in the future, and I know if anything's as good as it is now, that the game is here to stay for a long time. Today's episode is a little bit different. It's kind of a fan's dream, kind of a hypothetical thing. I talk about the possibility of expanding our game to a bigger, more competitive, and more legitimate trading card game compared to some of the others around. It's not necessarily needed for our game. Like I said, it's more of a dream than an actual thing that we need, so you may or may not be interested in these kind of videos. However, it's something I've wanted to work on for a while now, so I've broken it up into 2 parts and actually did a script for these. So, whether or not you want this to happen, I hope that you enjoy the video, I hope that you get some nice conversation out of the piece, and thanks, as always, for watching Prof-It.
You're ready to rock it with the nonsense and my hopes Poke projects. You won't stop till you're about to the top with all the hobbits. Hip with the metagame train, the reigning top kid's at the top of his game, and you can't hit my top fist. You want the best tricks? I suggest you profit. You want a mess Brit? I suggest you drop it. Once we started rolling, you know you can't stop it. Let's go and get some lessons from JWittz and Prof-It. Yeah.
Today's episode idea had been floating around in my head for a while, but everything really came into motion when I realized how big the official online program could be. I'm sure you've heard me say it before, and I'll say it again. I think the Pokemon Trading Card Game Online program is one of the biggest things to ever happen to our game, and here's why. Look at this data. Pokemon is the best-selling collectible card game for this particular quarter, and a lot of the time Pokemon is up within the top 2 or 3 spots for this category. It might seem natural that this would make Pokemon the #1 most played card game, but unfortunately that's not even close to true. Here's a second statistic from the same quarter. Sales in hobby shops. Pokemon is as far down as 6th. How can Pokemon sell the most cards, but not be the most popular game? The answer is pretty simple. It's geared toward children, and the average person that buys cards probably never picks up the game or will ever learn how to play it. If you're old enough to have known Pokemon when it first came out at the end of the 90s, think about it. How many of you, like me, just open packs to fill up a binder or trade with a couple other kids around the schoolyard without having an inkling on how the game was played? Over dozens of years later, that's still the same story. So how did anybody even get into the game in the first place? Once again, if you're old enough to have collected when the game first came out, chances are pretty high that you're probably familiar with this game, the Pokemon Trading Card Game for Game Boy Color. This game wasn't perfect, but it was pretty well done for its time. It ran the card game, explained rules well, and gave everybody a fun way to figure out that the cards are for more than just collecting. This, alongside an advertising campaign for the first Pokemon Leagues, established the first interest in the trading card game and established the fan base of the game for some of the biggest and longest accomplished players in the game today. The problem as of late is that this game was released in 1999. There have currently been 3 handheld systems by Nintendo since the release of the Game Boy Color, and any kid interested in Pokemon cards today has a minimal chance of being introduced to the actual card game itself. That is, until Emerging Powers. Now, I know you've heard me complain about how the set isn't that great, but much more important than the playability of the set is that every single time one of those kids buys a pack of Emerging Powers, they'll be introduced to an advertisement for the official online game. The stakes have been raised in every way. The game is essentially free. You no longer need a system or a cart to play. With a much heavier media-oriented era than 1999, using the internet for tutorials on how to play is a much better way to get people into the game. If this spread and interest in the game is going to be nearly as big as the Game Boy Color game, then we have a huge opportunity on our hands for an explosion with the fan base. For anyone that's been really proud of our game and our community, I'm always hoping that someday we can boost our numbers in hobby shops and continue to build ourselves to a more respected and legitimate gaming community. Yes, I'm talking about Magic the Gathering. Magic is by far the largest collectible card game community with millions of active players and an incredible amount of media coverage, prize support, and playership that honestly we aren't anywhere close to achieving. However, a huge part of Magic's success is their online program, which currently hosts more active players than the ones that are involved in the actual card game itself. It's not hard to not see our own online program and hope that we even get a glimpse of the success that Magic saw. This series isn't really about anything that needs to happen for the game. I don't run Pokemon and I don't know what's best for it. Rather, it's more a collective look based on all the great competitive players' wishes and expanding our game into something legitimate. While there's a lot of room for wishing and dreaming here, I'm going to try and keep everything realistic, or at least try and explain some ideas that are more possible than others. This is a two-part series, broken up into the obstacles that keep us from expanding and the potential solutions. You can't overcome a problem without knowing what it is, so today's episode is going to be more focused on the barriers that keep us from getting our game more intense. First is that Pokemon needs to decide that it wants to expand. I know this seems like a no-brainer, but it's actually one of the biggest obstacles in the way. We can only do as much with organized play as we are funded from the higher-ups. Take a look at Magic's yearly prize support, for example. Obviously this is a pipe dream, but compared to what you can earn back at Pokemon tournaments, the comparison just cannot be made. Or take a look at the World of Warcraft trading card game, which just switched companies from Blizzard to Cryptozoic. Their World Championships this year is featuring $250,000 of total prize support. So what's stopping us from getting the numbers that these other card games are getting? In my eyes, it's part audience and part desire by the managers. Magic has a ton more players, so of course they're going to have more prize support. However, with these pack codes expanding the game all over, it's undeniable that we're going to get a bigger audience. I find it hard to imagine that Pokemon would try and push this program in the first place if they hadn't intended to increase awareness for the game itself, so the ball is really in their court when it comes to deciding what comes out of it. Here's some more numbers, a comparison from 2004 to this upcoming year on prize support. 7 years have passed, playership is way up, but prize support is surprisingly down for regionals. What's up with that? Honestly, at a business level, it makes sense. If you can cut prize support and still get more players, why change the way things are going? My hope is that the increase of players is so big from the online program that we'll have to change the model again. Honestly, I can't think of any other reason that Pokemon would decide to change their current stance. In defending the explanation for the cut for regional scholarships, we got the following statement on Pokegym. There are a number of reasons for these changes. We have a flat budget, meaning I have to make each season work with a fixed amount of money. Correlate that to being on a fixed income. Your bills and needs may change from year to year, but your income does not. Most of the major changes in pricing fall into one of two or both categories: reallocation for infrastructure improvements or moves towards creating a more consistent worldwide structure. Regional scholarships might return in a future season. They might not. They might show up as additional events, they might not. Remember, while we're not increasing the number of regional championships in North America, we are increasing the number you can attend. That costs us more, but we think it's cool. Again, this season is not costing us less than last season. Not $1. Note, this season will not be perfect. Ultimately, we can only do as much for the game as the resources that Pokemon and Nintendo decide to put into the program. They've been putting out the same amount of money into the program every year, and there's nothing we can do to promote an increase in that spending but promote the game and help it expand bigger and bigger. The next problem is an expansion of this one. While it's certainly true that Pokemon the company needs to be ready for a competitive expansion, it's also just as important that the players themselves need to be ready for the same thing. I've talked before about how Pokemon is such a fantastic fan base because of its openness to all age groups of play. Pokemon is a universally accessible child-friendly property, drawing in fans of all ages to its competitive card game. Even though the card game is far more populated by the oldest age group, the 15 and over masters, you still can't ignore the reason that Pokemon is so friendly is because it keeps itself open to everyone. If we open up a more competitive game with bigger prizes and more attention to the players, we face exposing that competitive nature to children. Players like myself can't help but be biased, wanting more for us but forgetting that Pokemon needs to carry its policy equally over each age division at the moment. At 21 years old, I think that competitive Pokemon would be a great competitive and intellectual sport. However, is it in the community's best interest to instill a high-level competition for money in a crowd as young as 6 to 7 years old? Definitely something we want to think about. Maybe we need to get Pokemon to focus on the different age groups differently. Heck, I don't even know if it's the kids that are the biggest problem. As soon as more money is on the line, heavier competition and players playing solely to win will pop up more and more often. Things could get nasty. What makes Pokemon such a great game is that many people are still willing to play and pay for the cards and still have fun with so little on the line. Stepping things up too high might make the game too competitive and ruthless. A really careful balance has to be taken into consideration to make sure that the community could remain at their great nature while still being able to compete at a higher level. Next up is a look at how our current infrastructure looks like between us and the people that run our game. Currently, we don't have a very good extension of communication between us and the people that control our game's fate. For example, remember the weeks and weeks that followed before Battle Roads before we knew anything about what was going to happen? All we needed was a simple announcement to players saying that changes were underway and that they were working out an announcement that would have at least kept us out of the dark. Currently, what we have are a few members from Pokemon who are members of the Pokegym, such as Biggie, Dave, and Exobite. They reply occasionally to certain threads, but there's no consistency right now. We don't know when these members are going to make a post, leaving members to hope that with every important thread or complaint that they raise somehow it'll capture the attention of the higher-ups from Pokemon. Currently, I think that people that run the game are all great guys, and they really do care about the game. I just wish that we could have more of an active relationship with them. Okay, I know that sounds weird, but you guys know what I mean. Let me take you guys back to the early 21st century, when Wizards of the Coast still had control over the game. Now I'll be the first to say that Wizards almost killed the game near the end of their run, but it's a complicated relationship and story that would take another episode or longer to explain. Ignoring all else, there was one thing that I really liked about Wizards, and that was an occasional chat with the people that were in control of the game, where they talked about alternate formats, different cards that needed to be in the game or needed to be banned, and there was actually an amount of communication between us and the people that controlled the game's destiny. Obviously, I love Pokemon and would love to volunteer for this kind of position, but at this point, I wouldn't care who did it as long as we got something similar set up. Greater communication just adds so much to the game. It lets us get more input on other problems and complaints, such as formats, procedures, and rankings. While actively changing these kinds of things would be much better for the game, it's pointless complaining unless we have a reliable place to leave our complaints and know that they'll be listened to. Our last area to look at, and in my opinion, the biggest obstacle keeping us from making a legitimate competitive game out of Pokemon, is that we are completely isolated from Japan when it comes to how this game is run. Japan is where all Pokemon cards are designed and released. They decide the rules of the game, which we follow, but their tournament structure is usually completely different, following quicker games with 30 or 40 card decks. They do a lot of things differently than us, but I'll get to that in a moment. Then there's the Pokemon Company International, which runs tournaments for the entire rest of the world except Japan. We use Japan's rules for how the game is played, even when they're poorly designed, such as giving the player going first a 100% advantage. We also use all of Japan's cards, but we get slightly differently assembled sets, usually grouped by factors such as specific themes or which Pokemon movies are coming out soon. This is a huge problem. We're completely disconnected from the very people that shape and create the game. Let's go back to Magic. There, they have an entire team dedicated to research and development for new cards, constantly testing new formats years in advance and taking into consideration the comments and complaints of the players. Having this kind of dialogue between both the players and the creators is important for a game to remain balanced, creative, and fun. Currently, we have none of that. Let's take, for example, a current problem. Most players don't like the way that our rules work for giving such a huge boost to the player going first. The problem is that we're stuck using Japan's rules. We can't even complain to the Pokemon Company International. We'd have to complain to Japan. However, with both companies being separate and a heavy language barrier between the two, we're pretty much entirely out of the loop when it comes to having players making an impact on the game's development, whether it be rules, cards, or anything. But then, on an entirely other hand, Japan has a lot of things that I'd rather have for our game, but we don't retain from Japan. For example, 40-card 4-prize games would allow us to play best 2 out of 3 for Swiss rounds and decrease the luck factor. It'd also make decks cheaper to purchase and assemble because you'd need less cards, and that would cause tournaments to take less time. Here's another thing I just learned about. Did you guys know that Japan is working on a fun format where you can play with all the sets released from Diamond and Pearl all the way up to the recent Black and White sets? They have a crazy system which works similar to Yu-Gi-Oh's semi-limited system, where you can only have a certain amount of points dedicated to playing specifically powerful cards released over the formats. This format sounds fun, deep, creative, and unlike anything we've ever had before in our game, and I can guarantee that 95% of the people playing right now outside of Japan didn't even know it existed. New expansions to the way the game is played are entirely ignored because such a big gap between us and the creators of the game itself exists. I'm kinda getting ahead of myself for more subjects for a future day, but I wanted to finally take an episode to open the dialogue about something like this. If we ever desire something bigger than what we have now and a greater level of competitive play for Pokemon, 4 obstacles need to be jumped. Pokemon needs to have the urge to provide more funds into the trading card game program. Players need to agree that increasing support for the competitive game is good for the community. Players and the higher-ups behind the decisions for the game need a better system to communicate. And finally, players from all other countries need to find a better way to connect and interact with the actual people behind our game at Japan.
And that's about everything for part 1 of my video. Now, I haven't exactly narrowed down everything I want to talk about in the next video, but I do have one particular suggestion that I'm going to talk about as far as an alternative way for us to solve each of these 4 problems. If you guys agree and think that this is something that would be really cool for the game, feel free to comment below on your suggestions on different ways that we could tackle some of these 4 problems. If you don't, feel free to make a comment and explain why you don't think that things should change and why we should keep our game the same way that it has been. Either way, I'd rather that we just have the happiest community and an awesome, fun, competitive game. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and stay tuned next week for part 2. Peace! Neck.